This is Carol Stimmel. Thank you for joining us today in the Engerati studio at European Utility Week 2015. Today we're discussing the very important topic of cybersecurity and the grid. And I have three experts with me today, Emil, Alex, and Johan. I'm going to ask them to briefly introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about their organizations. And then from there, we're really going to dig into these topics pretty deeply. Emil?
Thank you. I am the project lead on smart grid security at SEAS-NVE. SEAS is a Danish utility. We have a large deployment of smart meters, and my job is to assess the risks involved in using our smart meters in a safe and secure way. And I guess that's why I'm here today.
Great,
right?
you're in the right place then.
Yep.
Alex.
So my name is Alex Campbell. I'm a director within the EMEIA Advisory Center for Cybersecurity. So my role is to advise organizations both in the public sector as well as private power and utilities companies on cybersecurity throughout the journey towards smart grid, smart metering transformation.
Okay, great. And Johan?
My name is Johan Rambi. I work at Alliander, the Netherlands. We are a distribution system operator, and my job is to advise the organization on privacy and security. I'm a corporate privacy security advisor, and I'm also a policymaker to embed privacy and security in the organization.
Okay, great. What a really nice balance of representation to this issue. A very complex issue in a world where we used to just deliver energy one way, top to bottom, hierarchically. And now we have not only a two-way grid for energy flows, but an awful lot of communications infrastructure. We know a lot from the internet world that as soon as you introduce a new sensor or some new communicating device or something that actuates, you have that many more attack vectors. Not to mention that we often forget about all the physical attack vectors as well. So this is a really complex issue. The thing that I find very curious and maybe a little disturbing sometimes is when I hear this talk about grid security and also the activity of attacks that are ongoing. Is we're still trying to figure out the standards. We're still trying to figure out approaches. How do we solve this issue? And we really need to be moving forward quite quickly. And I know you all know this, and you're doing it. One of the things I want to understand is, what are we doing today, and are we doing it in a way that will prevent a future trade-off in our security? So instead of rushing out to bolt something on to secure a system, are we doing that, and how are we going to move forward to make sure that we have a comprehensive program very quickly? You want to start with that, Emil?
It's a really broad question. There's a lot of moving parts in security, but I think it's a really great approach if you look at security as a process, and I think there's a tendency in the industry as a whole that we're seeing requirements fully disconnected from what's actual security. Security, especially for the grid, requires a fundamental understanding of your grid, how it works, the performance characteristics. I like to say that availability in the grid is king. That's the dominating factor of security. We can't just pile on security and then degrade our performance, because then it wouldn't make any sense.
Right.
So many of the requirements and templates and best practices are great, but they're only a start. You have to take them in, and then you have to apply them for your specific problem. No two grids are the same.
That's true. That's true. Even in the United States, people don't realize we have 4,000 different grids, essentially. So very good point. What do you think?
Yeah, I think it's a very good and valid question. I think, there is no silver bullet. There is no magic technology or tool we can drop in order to address a cybersecurity challenge. To me, the big challenge is changing the perception, the mindset of people, the way that they view cybersecurity as a blocker to business, as something that is there to prevent things from happening, functionality from happening, to changing that mindset to thinking of security as an enabler, a catalyst for accelerating an organization's growth, potential in the smart grid world. And that is not easy to happen, that change. If we look at one of the key challenges with smart grids, one of the key cybersecurity challenges, that is, in my view, related to the convergence of IT with OT, of information technology with operational technology. And I think there's a lot to be learned by looking at those two different types of technologies and the journey that those two different types of technologies have had. IT systems started off being isolated systems that eventually got more connected, more integrated with each other. And we're seeing that happening with OT, and maybe there's a 15, 20 year delay between IT and OT. So what are the key lessons we can learn from IT? The main one for me is that we cannot prevent an attack from happening, and I think that we've realized that in the last 2 or 3 years. If someone is sophisticated enough, the attacker, if they have the right funding, if they're patient enough, then they will eventually get in. So that balance between the protective controls in order to make it more difficult, complicate the attacker, with the monitoring controls in place, the detection capability in order to be able to understand if there's any suspicious behavior within the network, raise a flag, and then trigger an incident management process. So that balance between protective and detective, I think, is key, and I don't think at the moment we have that balance right.
Well, that's Alex, you raised a very interesting point, which I hear very rarely, which is using cybersecurity as an engine for growth, actually. So that's very interesting. What do you think, Johan?
Yeah, I agree with Alex, and I want to add on that is, for us, we are already now going to the next level of the maturity, is that we want to see it indeed as an enabler, and it is for us a culture shift, is to make aware that security is not a showstopper, but can improve, can enhance, can initiate all kinds of new processes, and we see it from an integrated way, that not only cybersecurity but also physical security, personnel security, even enterprise IT security need to be seen as a holistic approach, and as well with privacy, because privacy is also very important. And if you will address them as enablers, they will be for us like quality criteria to do it already by design, and to help the processes and the organization to think already up front how to deal with that. And so we are going to the next level, is not saying, okay, you need to do it, but more to say, okay, what will you do and how will you do it? And yeah, that's important.
Well, you raised an important issue of the relationship between physical security, IT security, and the issue of privacy.
Yes.
And often those are conflated. Now, when I asked the question, I really only was raising the issue of IT, OT types of security, but like IT and OT, they're converging. The ideas are often conflated in the consumer's head, and even in the heads of a lot of people in the industry. So one of the other interesting things that I heard in what you said is this idea of the grid being one machine now, from the point of generation, whether that's a utility scale generation or distributed rooftop solar, to the point of consumption. So we do have security, of course, we do have the issues you raised, but we also have this issue of privacy. Let's talk a little bit about that relationship. Let's clarify how we ought to be thinking about it so we can best build the right systems. Who wants to jump in on that?
I think with privacy, a lot of people view it differently, security and privacy. The way that I see it, especially in the context of smart metering, because I think that is where privacy comes in. We need to look at it collectively, because security is there in order to ensure privacy. As the data becomes more granular about energy consumption, we get a window into how people live their lives effectively. If they're on holiday, do they have expensive gadgets? And the more granular the data becomes, the more personal it becomes. So there needs to be a collective approach to privacy and security. And by understanding the individual privacy requirements based on geographies, because those differ, and clearly within EMEIA, even within EMEIA and within Europe, there's totally different approaches to data protection and privacy. But understanding what the requirements are and then feeding those requirements into the wider security requirements, I think that is, to me, the best approach for addressing some of the key privacy issues.
Okay, well, Emil, you talked about, in your first answer, about requirements, the importance of the right requirements. Do you agree with that perspective of kind of
I totally agree with
them?
the fact that security is an enabler for privacy.
Okay.
We're reusing a lot of the same mechanisms that we use to secure data to secure privacy. But I think when we talk privacy, it's extremely important that we ought to be transparent. We need to educate our customers and users of our system how we handle their data and let them be in control of what we share. And so, in order to build a trust relationship, we need transparency. We need to explain how we handle their data.
Yeah.
And I think that talks to your point about a collective approach to privacy, involving the customer, explaining how we handle and manage their data.
Yeah.
It's about being in control of privacy.
We are now in the beginning of handling more data and also processing all kinds of data, and that includes personal data. So that's for us a game changer. Now really engage the individual, the consumer, and that's why we need to comply to the privacy and to handle that as careful as they need to be handled. And then security is not the only thing, transparency is very important, and explain the purposes. Why are you doing that? Because most of the time, unclarity is the biggest objection. If you do not, if you cannot tell why, then you cannot handle you cannot process the data. Once again, within our organization, if we could make that transparent, what the purposes are, you can see privacy as an enabler, because then it can help you make your processes more efficient or effective, to start up new processes with engaging the customer. So that's why privacy is very important now for us.
Right. Well, and we talked from the outset about how every utility is very unique. I mean, it's unique in geography, the technology it's used, both in the field, the outside plant, and internally operations, information technology. And I had raised the issue of standards originally. So when we talk about the standards for cybersecurity, I think we all know what we're talking about there, I would hope. But the standards for privacy are a lot more complicated, and they seem to be more regional in nature, beholden to not only regulatory forces, but political forces as well. Especially in Europe, we saw some slowdowns, for example, of smart meter deployments because of the idea that was impinging on your right to privacy in your home. But we're a global world now. We learn from each other, especially in cybersecurity. That's the way we need to learn. We need to be communicating, if your utility is attacked, to share that information out. So how do we deal with these kind of somewhat, I don't know if walls is too strong a word to use, how do we somehow create a forum where we could start sharing this information to keep the grid safer worldwide? What do you think, Alex?
Yeah, I think the privacy debate obviously is very big, and we can spend hours discussing privacy and the differences between different countries within Europe, the differences between different regions around the world. For me, smart metering has, if you like, highlighted and focused this issue more than other types of complicated systems because, well, first of all, because in many regions it's mandatory, so the dynamics change in terms of all of the households, or a large proportion of the households in certain regions will get a smart meter, and that is part of government mandates. So that changes a little bit the dynamics. Even though everybody has a mobile phone, a tablet, or most people have tablets, devices that contain quite a lot of personal data, there is a choice. They can choose not to have one, and that's a big difference and it's to do with the psychology of the overall issue. Mm-hmm. If something is mandated by the government, then it produces different challenges. But I think the energy sector as a whole is probably a little bit unprepared for this new transformation, in that the data that the utilities will have about their customers will change completely, is changing completely. From information that could be used to estimate the bills or to get an accurate bill once a quarter. Now we're moving into a world where every 15 minutes they can have quite detailed, granular energy usage data. And I don't think from a regulatory point of view, from a privacy point of view, the energy sector is ready for that change.
Emil, what do you think of that position? Do you think we're underprepared or not prepared?
Yeah, I think we want everything at once.
Yeah.
We're seeing this great evolution in technology, and we're trying to keep up. And the way we're trying to keep up with it is to make requirements or regulations in terms of privacy, which, as you also tell us, that it's like a slowing down factor, right? I wish I had a great answer to the standards problem and the mandates imposed on the real security problem, the real privacy problem. I don't have a good answer.
Well, okay, so that begs the question: what is the real problem? I mean, are we getting a full understanding of the level of attacks that are happening, potential of rootkits or what have you, highly technical things being installed out in the grid? And
so if you're moving from a privacy discussion to more like a threat perspective?
Well, I guess, unless we agree that our privacy is best protected by a secure grid as well, right?
Well, that's true. It's part of it, but it's also, as we just said, that it's about putting the user into control and being transparent, and even better, maybe having a third party that is doing oversight for utilities, for whoever is controlling your data. We need to be more open and embrace audits, but creating templates that are trying to force a certain method down to a large population of utilities in different countries is a very tricky problem.
For sure,
On standards, we have a very difficult situation with standards. If you talk about privacy and security, there is a regulatory framework for privacy coming up in Europe about the General Data Protection Regulation. We don't have a European cybersecurity standard. We have only an information security standard. But it does not, there is no relationship between the data protection side of privacy and the cybersecurity, as well as with physical security. So they're all different standards. And I want to raise a topic, and I want to put attention on standardization, is that maybe you could see that as one standard regarding resilience. And if you put that under one umbrella, you can come up with one standard that has different kind of relationships with each other, for the energy sector, of course, and that you can use that standard globally. Because there are standards from the United States, there are standards from Europe, and even those standards, it's difficult how you want to use them.
Well, let's talk about resilience for a little bit. So, I mean, we've seen this happen in this conversation here. I started off the whole panel with really, let's talk about technical security, physical security, and then the privacy issue crept in, and then we kind of went back and forth, and they come together and they fall apart. So let's take this idea of resiliency, because we're turning into a communications grid as well, all of a sudden things like personal data now becomes part of the security model, right? So I don't think we can pull them apart anymore, as much as for a long time we've liked to say cybersecurity, data privacy, this is about data in motion or data at rest. It's not, it's coming together operationally as well as in the IT realm. So, I'm going to come back to this question, I'm going to ask it again, if you were to say to everybody who's listening to this panel, this is the way we need to think about the problem of security, do we need to redefine it to help us attack the problem? I'm going to ask Alex here because I think he was going to jump in on this.
Yeah, I think just going back to briefly the conversation around standards, but I think it's also the answer to your question. Standards we need to understand what the standards are there for and what is the objectives of introducing standards. One of the key objectives is to enforce some sort of interoperability, some sort of common use of best practices. But they can also instill a false sense of security if they're viewed as a compliance exercise. That I've followed this standard, therefore I'm okay. I've done my risk assessment in the beginning of the year, developed a number of controls, therefore I've done my piece. That's what the standard told me. So a lot of it, and the success of standards and the success of ensuring that there is an adequate level of cybersecurity is how do you interpret those standards. Most of the standards start off by asking you to do some sort of risk assessment, to understand what the risks that you're trying to protect against are. And then some offer some guidance, some offer the type of controls that you can choose based on those risks. So the importance of the risk assessment, I don't think can be overstated. So an organization needs to understand what the risks are to them and needs to develop an approach, an overall strategy in order to address those risks. And also needs to maintain that, needs to be quite agile, because if you do a risk assessment in the beginning of the year and then forget about it until next year, then things have changed, both inside your organization. There's new processes being developed, new service offerings that impacts the risk, but also on the outside, the threats are also developing, the new attack techniques that are being developed by the hacking community. So you need to keep on top. It's a living process as opposed to a once in a year exercise.
Let me see if I can just restate very simply what I heard, and it's an interesting answer, that cybersecurity, physical security, privacy, it is really the process of risk management, is what I'm hearing you say. And you agree with that?
Yeah. We have put it now, I work at the Department of Governance, Risk and Compliance. And within that department, we are an assurance department to have all those risks addressed and put it on the enterprise risk management, so that you could deliver a risk report to the board, including cybersecurity, including privacy, including financial, operational, and treat them as the same, because that's now the next level, is that the risks who are really critical to your organization, you should address that in the same way. And that's why risk management is now very important. And therefore also to handle that from an organization point of view, from a business point of view. What could affect your business? That could be, for now, for us, data privacy risks and cybersecurity risks. And on the topic of cybersecurity, what Alex mentioned before is that prevention is not the game anymore. It's now how to monitor and detect and to respond immediately, near real time, to those threats, so that you can mitigate those risks much earlier on an alert basis and not on an incident basis. So that's for us now a challenge.
Great. And do you agree with that? It sounds like
I think we're coming back to where we started again. I started out saying that it's not enough standards, best practices, templates, frameworks. They're all a great start to guide you. But as Alex and you guys, we keep saying that you got to assess your system. You got to understand your risks, where you're most exposed, where you want to invest in security, what makes sense to you, because no two systems are alike.
Right.
Standards are a great tool, but they're not the final answer. And I completely agree with my fellow couch guys that that protection is just one of the components in security. It's about raising the bar high enough. But if you're faced with a persistent and skilled adversary, you will have a breach at some point, and you better be prepared. So you better have intrusion detection in place. You better have incident response, so you're thriving during your breach. You know exactly what to do, and maybe you can even stop it in its tracks. So, I think those are great points to raise, and they need to be said.
We're just about out of time, which is kind of a bummer, because we could go on and on. This has been a really interesting conversation. I actually feel like we achieved something important here, which is, kind of rethinking about this problem And that goes to everything. It talks about breaking down the functional silos in the utility, the IT and OT convergence issue that you raised, and being able to look at the grid as a machine from generation to consumption, and as a fundamental operation, not an add-on.
An important thing right now is, and that's also being said in the keynote, is that we need now to start collaborating more. We need to start sharing information more.
Yes.
This is not a known problem from each company by themselves, but we need to collaborate and share information, because if you share information, we all get better of it.
Right.
And within Europe, we all deal with each other. We are integrated. So on security, on privacy, we need to share that information. And one thing that I would like to address is that we have started a European Energy ISAC, a community of information sharing, cybersecurity, privacy information, and especially for not only utilities but also all the stakeholders involved in the energy sector, because even academia, vendors and governments have very valuable information. So by getting them together in a trusted environment, that can really set now the scene to improve. And that's a nice initiative now now that we're starting.
Right, so in a nutshell, cybersecurity is about collaboration and understanding the unique risks in your environment. So thank you guys very much, Emil, Alex, Johan. Thank you for joining us in the Engerati studio at European Utility Week 2015. This is Carol Stimmel.